Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And this week and next week, I'm going through the entire Mel Brooks collection. And today I'm doing the 1981 film, History of the World, Part 1. Here's your trivia question for today. Almost all of the segments take place in the past. What is the one segment that is set in the future? The answer will be at the end of this episode. In the film History of the World Part 1, we watch an anthology story that's told through different points in time in history. We begin at the dawn of man and then spend a little time in the Stone Age. There are also a few biblical moments sprinkled in from time to time. We then spend a good portion of time in the Roman Empire, where a group of friends who are randomly thrown together end up pissing off the wrong person, and now they have to escape the empire while the Roman army is chasing after them. From there, we spend a little time at the Spanish Inquisition, and then finally wrap everything up with King Louis XVI dealing with the French Revolution. So, the way that History of the World Part 1 came about is there was a period of time where people kept asking Mel Brooks, "What movie are you going to do next?" Aggravated, he ended up just throwing out there, "I'm going to do the history of the world." The person then asked, "Well, what part?" He jokingly said back, "Part 1," and apparently this ended up inspiring him. It was unfortunate timing when the film was released, as the same day that movie came out, so did Raiders of the Lost Ark and Clash of the Titans. This movie would in fact be written, directed, and produced by Mel Brooks. Also, he ended up playing the most characters he's ever done in one of his films, as he did 5 roles: Moses, Comicus, the Grand Inquisitor Torquemada, King Louis XVI, and of course, Jacques the Piss Boy. Gregory Hines played the character of Josephus, and this was actually Hines' feature film debut. But did you happen to know that the character of Josephus was originally going to be played by Richard Pryor, but due to the famous drug-related incident where he caught himself on fire, he was unable to do so. There are definitely some familiar faces throughout this film that you've seen in other Mel Brooks movies, including Dom DeLuise as Emperor Nero, Madeline Kahn as Empress Nympho, Harvey Korman as Count de Monet, who is now playing his second character in a Mel Brooks film that has a hard to pronounce name, as he did so as Hedley Lamar in the film Blazing Saddles. Now, the role of Count de Monet was originally offered to John Cleese, but due to scheduling conflicts, he was unable to perform in the film. Cloris Leachman appears as the character of Madame Defarge, and just like every Mel Brooks film that she appears in, she has an interesting facial feature. This time around, it's an elongated wart. Now, the character of Madame Defarge is actually a character from Charles Dickens' novel A Tale of Two Cities. Sid Caesar makes an appearance as the main caveman. Ron Carey's character of Swiftus Lazarus is a nod towards Swifty Lazar, who was a Hollywood agent. Andreas Voutsinas is Bernays, and for some reason I always laugh at the sequence between his character and Harvey Korman's Count de Monet when they're arguing over the raisins. Rudy DeLuca, who appears in quite a few of Mel Brooks' films, plays the character of Captain Mucus. And a man who would eventually direct his own films, Barry Levinson, who is the column salesman. There are also a pair of actresses making their first feature film debut in this movie, including Pamela Stevenson as Mademoiselle Rimbaud, and of course there's Mary Margaret Humes, who plays Miriam. She, by the way, was cast when Mel Brooks saw Humes on a Sunset Boulevard billboard. If by chance you didn't notice his name in the credits, Orson Wells is the narrator for this film, and Mel Brooks offered to pay him $5,000 per day. Brooks figured that he'd have Wells spend about 5 8-hour days recording and re-recording, so he paid him upfront $25,000. But by noon on the first day, Wells had actually recorded all of his lines to perfection. Brooks ended up saying to him, "Oh my god, I could have just paid you 5,000." Actor John Hurt has a cameo in this film as Jesus. Now, Brooks apparently had produced the film Elephant Man, and during it, Hurt mentioned to Brooks that he was interested in doing comedy. Another familiar face you might have recognized was Hugh Hefner. That's right, the guy who owned Playboy. Also, by the way, all of the Vestal virgins other than Miriam were actually played by Playboy Playmates. There were also quite a few well known actors and comedians of the time that made cameos throughout the film. Some of the ones, and believe me, there are many, that were in the film were B. Arthur, Jackie Mason, Shecky Green, and Henny Youngman. There's also another vocal cameo you may not have noticed, but the voice of God that is talking to Moses was actually done by Carl Reiner. There are so many well known quotes throughout this film, but the one that became the most popular was the catchphrase, "It's good to be the king." In the segment where Moses comes out with the 15 commandments, were you ever curious as to what those other commandments were? Because all of the tablets are actually apparently written in Hebrew, and so those last five are you shall not pass, you shall not laugh, you shall not buy, you shall not stay, and you shall not break, which is highly unfortunate because of what happens. There was also originally going to be a segment about 3 Mile Island and the accident that happened there, but it ended up being considered too dark, so they never put it in. In case you were ever curious, this movie was filmed in England, France, California, and Nevada. Now, finally, just last year in 2023, Mel Brooks finally put out History of the World Part 2 as a miniseries. Now, for years, Brooks had always said that if he ever made a sequel, it wouldn't be Part 2, but something like Part 4 just to mess with people. Here's a random piece of trivia that is believed to be connected to this film. There's a card game out there called Guillotine, and it takes place during the French Revolution. Now, on one of the cards, there is a character called the Piss Boy, and this is believed to be an actual reference towards this film. So, when it comes to the film History of the World Part 1, this movie is not only very funny, it has so many great sequences in it, but it also is very quotable. And what I find interesting is it's very rare that someone will mention this movie as an anthology film, but it technically is. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. Now, if you also enjoyed this movie, other films I recommend checking out are Monty Python's Life of Brian, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Cheech and Chong's The Corsican Brothers, and Time Bandits. Now it's time for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. Almost all of the segments take place in the past. What is the one segment that is set in the future? So at the end of the film, they show a couple of segments that may appear in a possible sequel. One of them during World War II, one of them during the time of the Vikings, and of course the one that takes place in the future, Jews in Space. Here's also another little piece of trivia related to this segment, which you may already know about, but the music that was used for it would end up being recycled and then used for the Men in Tights song from Robin Hood Men in Tights. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.